too. And I just was really freaked out. It's a fucking medical procedure without anesthetic. And the first person lay down on the table and they started to draw a line in her flesh with a cauterizing iron. And her flesh started to burn and smoke and sizzle. We had to hold her down. We were crying, we were shaking, we were holding each other. One of my other sisters and I were looking at each other like, what the fuck? Like, where the fuck are we? How did we get here?
Welcome, Janja Lalich. Thank you so much for joining me today for this episode dedicated to cults. So I guess the first question I had is, according to your decades-long research, what profiles of persons psychologically and socially are susceptible to fall into the cult trap?
Well, there actually isn't one profile or one type of person. Cults have been successful at recruiting all kinds of people from all walks of life. If there's any common denominator that I've seen over the 30-some years that I've been doing this work, I would say it's idealism. It's people who want to have a better world or a better life for themselves. It could be more money, it could be better family relations, it could be some kind of spiritual answer or political answer. And so it's really that draws someone in. If they happen to run into someone who is offering them this promise or this solution that makes sense to them at the time, it resonates with them at the time. So really anybody can join. What also is important is that the person is typically at some kind of vulnerability point in their life. And what that means, and that's not a sickness, that's not an ailment. Being vulnerable is a natural human response that happens thousands of times in our lives, right? We can be vulnerable because someone just died, or because it's raining outside, or we moved to a new town, or we just started school. And all it means is that we're a little bit nervous, maybe a little bit open, not quite settled. And if at that moment you run into someone again whose pitch resonates with you, then it's easier for them to lure you in.
So yeah, it sounds like almost anybody can fall into the cult trap. Do we have a sense today of how many people have been or are today inside of cults?
Well, no, it's really impossible to make a count because there are so many cults and so many types, and it's global. They're all over the world. They're in every country, and they go from huge, large groups with sometimes hundreds of thousands of members to something like a family cult. So it really is impossible to get a count, and certainly the cults themselves don't stand up and say, hey, here I am, count me, I'm a cult. So it's really an impossible task.
Yeah, right. They would tend to maybe not publicize too much all their deeds, but we'll get into more details, I guess, during the interview. So in your book, Bounded Choice, you define a cult as follows. A cult can be either a sharply bounded social group or a diffusely bounded social movement held together through shared commitment to a charismatic leader. It upholds a transcendent ideology, often but not always religious in nature, and requires a high level of personal commitment from its members in words and deeds. So can you explain to us some elements of this definition, like this commitment to this charismatic leader and the relationship between this leader and the followers?
So charisma is a rather misunderstood concept. Most people think charisma is something that's inherent in the individual, that you're born with charisma, but that's not actually true. So a sociologist, one of the founding sociologists, Max Weber, was the first to write about charisma, and he defined charisma and identified charisma as a social relationship. So what that means is that in order to be considered charismatic, you have to have others, right, your audience, so to speak, recognize you as that, right? They give you that power. And so once you decide that someone is charismatic, then in a sense, they have power over you, because it's an imbalance of power in that relationship, because you are probably in awe of that person, right? Or you somehow honor that person, or you think that person is extremely special. And it doesn't have to be a cult leader, right? It could be a political leader like John Kennedy or Barack Obama, Martin Luther King, right? Those were nice, decent, charismatic people. But in the case of cults, we have charismatic individuals who've been given that and who take advantage of it and then exploit their followers.
Right. And what do you mean with transcendent ideology?
A transcendent ideology for me is a belief system that offers you the answer to everything, to the past, the present, and the future. And it considers, or the person who is promoting that belief system considers it to be the one true way. There is no other way. And what's important, the most important aspect of this belief system in this context is that it includes a requirement for a personal transformation, that you have to go through a personal change in order to be accepted on that path to whatever it is they're promising you again. And that process of the personal transformation is the indoctrination process.
Right. Yeah, it's like walking through fire, and you have to make sacrifices in order to become like better.
Exactly.
Whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not a given. You have to work for it.
Yeah, and pay, I guess, a lot.
And pay a lot of money in some cases.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
And in some cases, pay for your life.
Wow. Yeah, that's terrible. And yeah, well, what kind of commitments have cults demanded from their members? If you have examples, and I think many people who have seen the documentary or one of the documentaries on this cult called Nexium, which had DOS group, this horrible DOS group, was branding women, branding members,
right.
Its members, which were exclusively women, which were serving, serving sexually and maybe in other ways the leader. So they required collateral from these women in this DOS group. So is this like an example of this kind of commitment?
Well, it's really going to vary. I mean, it's important to realize that cults exist on a continuum, right? So there might be cults that are more benign. They're still harmful in a way, because in order to be in a cult, you have to give up yourself, right? And you give up your sort of decision-making power, your sense of self. But a cult can be more benign. And then you have a group like Nexium, the cult in upstate New York, that was very extreme and is one of the more extreme groups that, in my opinion, that I've seen over the years, because the leader was so sadistic and because of the kind of sexual exploitation of the women and the branding, that essentially they were sex slaves. And so it was sex trafficking and all of that going on. So the commitment that's required of you in most cases is total commitment. You're in this for your life. In many groups, you have to make a pledge. Like in the group I was in, I had to pledge that I was going to do this for the rest of my life. And often that pledge is in front of other people, which makes it more powerful and makes you more likely to stay with it because you've said it in front of others, right? We know that works. So the commitment is, again, as I said, it's going to vary with each group. But most of the groups that we know about do have very clear kind of rules and ways of being, ways of speaking, ways of operating, and in some cases can get very extreme and get involved in criminal activities or, really antisocial activities.
Yeah, in the case of Nexium, it was really horrible because these women, these members of this DOS group, this secretive DOS group inside the Nexium cult, were asked to provide like very, very embarrassing or compromising evidence, like pictures of themselves in sexually suggestive positions or whatever,
Right.
horrible things about their family members, making very serious accusations. So yeah,
Right.
particularly.
But that, you know, in the end, that was his downfall,
Yeah,
because
he went too far.
he went too far with that, because it essentially was blackmail. And so, you know, often it's very difficult to bring legal cases to court, because people tend to think, oh, well, these are adults and they're doing it of their own free choice. They've made the, you know, what can we do about it? But in this case, they literally were being blackmailed. So there was obvious coercion and undue influence. And so that's what really nailed him in the courtroom, was that it was impossible for him to get around that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure many cops and prosecutors are so frustrated because they know many groups are cults, but they just don't find something which they can use to
Exactly.
bring in charges and so on.
Exactly.
It must be very frustrating for lots of people. So what is the psychological profile of a cult leader, and also maybe the social profile? What kind of social profile do they come from, these people?
Well, cult leaders, again, have come every class of people, from working class to upper class. Generally, they are narcissists who only think of themselves and believe that the world revolves around them. They're often megalomaniacs, which means, you know, they want to rule the world. And in many cases, they may have psychopathic tendencies, and that's when things get really nasty. Which we saw in the case of Keith Raniere with NXIVM, or we saw with, you know, Jim Jones back in the day with the Jonestown cult, and many other cults where it wasn't just narcissism, it wasn't just some guy who was ego driven, but he or she also had, you know, sadistic or masochistic tendencies, criminal tendencies, and that's what then makes it an even more traumatic experience for the members. So they're not nice people. There may be some guys, you know, some cult leaders who started out thinking, you know, maybe they had a psychotic experience and they thought they talked to God and they really believed that, and so they started getting a following. But, you know, as I said before, people can't handle that kind of power when they have that power over people. You know, we know the saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So even in those cases where maybe they started out okay, it evolves into something else. And in my opinion, you know, 98% of the time they start out as con artists. They start out as people who want to exploit and take advantage and use other people.
In the next part,
if the indoctrination process is successful, you then enter this state of mind that I call bounded choice, which means that yes, you have choices. No one's holding a gun to your head, but your choices are limited. It's an illusion of choice.